Lots of video game protagonists are born into the hero business. They're the chosen one, a naturally talented prodigy or a skilled professional that seems like the right fit for the job. However, there are also those who find themselves saving the world by sheer happenstance. Major spoilers will follow because I'm Sai, this is WhatCulture, and these are 10 video game protagonists who became heroes by accident. Number 10. Heihachi Mishima, Tekken 8. Heihachi Mishima is the most recognizable character from the Tekken series, who acts as the franchise main villain in almost every single game. Almost because in the newest entry in the series, Tekken 8, Heihachi has a sudden change of heart and decides to join the side of the good guys, fixing all of the mistakes of his villainous past. Now, it might look like this decision was made by Heihachi after some long sessions of self-reflection, but in reality the answer is much, much funnier. Heihachi simply forgot that he was a bad guy. Don't you hate when that happens? Yes, the plot of Heihachi's personal storyline in Tekken 8 is that due to an accident he lost all of his memory, and this included all of his evil deeds and plans. Although throughout the game he begins to remember his dishonorable past and his decision to become a hero becomes more conscious, the fact of the matter is that this huge character development is the result of one massive accident. It's honestly hilarious to think that all these years of being a power-hungry warmonger could have been stopped if Heihachi had taken a small bonk on the head sooner. A cartoonishly large lump growing out of his amnesiac head. I don't know if that would gel with the hairstyle though. Number 9. The Inquisitor, Dragon Age Inquisition. Dragon Age Inquisition's protagonist is probably put in the most important and reverent position in the entire franchise as the Herald of Andastre. Unlike their predecessors who are roped into hopeless causes and have to resolve them with nothing but their skills, the Inquisitor has a huge religious arsenal of soldiers and spies at their disposal, which is kind of funny considering they got their power and status by accident. In the first half of the game, the reason behind your character's mysterious mark that brands them as the chosen Herald of Andastre is unclear, and so the more religious folk around them believe them to be a prophesized hero that was specifically selected by the Maker to fix the demon crisis. However, once you learn the truth, it turns out your cushy spot on the throne is anything but. Your character simply happened to be lucky enough to end up in a spot where they could be saved by the benevolent spirit who granted them the power they needed, no gods or prophecies involved. Virtually anyone else could have been the great hero who gets to order everyone around, but since it was you might as well reap the benefits. Number 8. Tav, Baldur's Gate 3. The main cast of Baldur's Gate 3 are all people with extraordinary histories, from Shadowheart being the chosen cleric of her goddess to Gale being the literal ex of his. Pretty much every single character in your party hides a special past that destines them for greatness. And then, well, there's you. Unlike the rest of the party, the default Tav that serves as your avatar in the vibrant world of Faerun is just an unfortunate resident of Baldur's Gate. You don't end up in your particular circumstances because of a special mission or calling, but because you are unfortunate enough to stay in Baldur's Gate when the Mind Flayers attacked. And yet, despite your rather average and nondescript past, you're the one that other far more worthy characters elect as their leader and forced to resolve the Tadpole Crisis. There's no reason why Tav would be a hero in this story besides them getting accidentally infected with a tadpole themselves, but perhaps their ordinary past and circumstances are what make them the ideal leader. After all, when everyone is special, it's the random nobody that really stands out. No offense. Number 7. Ethan Winters, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Out of all the protagonists of the Resident Evil franchise, Ethan Winters might be the biggest rando who had no reason to end up saving the world. There's many cases of wrong place, wrong time in horror, but Ethan's biggest mistake was the woman that he married. In his debut in Resident Evil 7, the game kicks off with Ethan searching for his missing wife, stumbling upon a house of murder and mold along the way. As the story unfolds and we find out more about the bioweapon behind all this chaos, the player learns that Mia Winters, Ethan's aforementioned beloved, is closer to the heart of the story than he is. What she calls a babysitting job is closer to terrorism, and she's partially in charge of transporting the weapon that winds up setting off the chain reaction of RE7's story. In fact, it's Mia and her infection by the mold that pretty much set Ethan up for his second of 2 adventures in Resident Evil Village. Again, Ethan must fight monsters for the sake of his family purely because of his relationship with Mia and what that has meant for their child. Let's be honest, although we would all want to be the Jills and Leons and Chris's of the Resident Evil series, in reality, we'd all be more like Ethan skeleton. Scared, confused, and wondering what must have gone wrong in our lives to end up fighting sentient mold and tall vampire ladies. Number 6. Nameless hero, Gothic. The main protagonist of the Gothic series is such an unimportant person that the game's creators never even bothered to give them a name, and yet he's responsible for single-handedly stopping not one, not two, but 3 major disasters. But how, you ask, and why? Well, the answer to these questions is simple, being one really unlucky inmate. Yes, the only reason why the Nameless hero has earned the hero part in his name is because he managed to be randomly selected to do something that would forever rewrite the course of his life. At the beginning of the first game, when the Nameless one is about to be thrown into the penal colony, he's given a letter by a mage so that he can deliver it to the other fire mages inside. Although this task seems simple, delivering the letter ends up forcing Gothic's greatest hero to become involved in the colony's politics, uncover its dark secrets, and ultimately stop an ancient demon from destroying the world. This would only create a domino effect of more heroic deeds in later games, making the Nameless hero earn more and more renown throughout the realm until he finally becomes the king in the 4th game. Now that is a rags to riches story. Number 5. Delsin Rowe, infamous second son. Delsin Rowe from infamous second son is an interesting case of a hero. Although he has inherent superpowers, he technically would have never discovered them, not to mention use them for good or evil, depending on what kind of playthrough you want to run, if it wasn't for one fateful accident. You see, Delsin's secret conduit power is that he's able to absorb the powers of other conduits. Because he's from a small Native American tribe and has spent all of his life in a remote community away from Seattle, Delsin would have never had the chance to realize he is a conduit if it weren't for a group of superhuman convicts breaking out of prison near his town. The convoy conveniently deciding to drive through Delsin's hometown is what allowed the young hero to come across another conduit and awaken his power. If the prisoners had executed their plan slightly later or earlier, he would have remained a nameless delinquent for the rest of his life. His powers might seem amazing, but without finding more conduits, Delsin's story would have been a lot more boring. Probably wouldn't have made a video game out of it, to be fair. Number 4, The Living One, Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura. The Living One is the title given to the main protagonist of Arcanum, a steampunk meets medieval fantasy RPG from 2001. It may sound like the name of someone who's part of some millennial-old prophecy, yes, the Living One. However, in reality, the living part of their name is a reference to the fact that they simply, lived. The game starts with your character taking a voyage on a luxurious zeppelin, which is blown out of the sky shortly after its departure by a couple of orcs in biplanes. The Living One ends up being the sole survivor of the imminent crash due to nothing but good luck. The only reason why they get wrapped up in the arcane prophecies is because the only other survivor of the crash who lived just long enough to entrust you with a ring told you to deliver it to the workshop without telling you it's connected to a world-ending threat. Long story short, your character becomes the hero who saves everyone from a mad necromancer simply because they tried to honor a dying man's wish. So I guess the moral here is don't be nice to people unless you want to be sent on a suicide mission. Okay. Number 3, Claire Redfield, Resident Evil 2. Back to Resident Evil now, and it's a series with a long list of playable characters. Whilst the first game's special operatives weren't necessarily trained to fight monsters, the second game took this up the creek without a paddle feeling for its cast to the next level. Resident Evil 2 starred a police officer on his first day and a simple college girl. And whilst you could argue Leon for this spot, Claire Redfield is kind of the real hero of Resident Evil 2. After all, surviving is one thing, but she not only manages to get a small child out of the zombie apocalypse safely, but she does it with minimal training. As the sister to Chris Redfield, Claire is the main connection between the first 2 Resi games, and whilst the law touches on her having firearms training, she's still a 19-year-old college student, who just so happens to come into Raccoon City during the T-virus outbreak to find out what happened to her brother, and presumably ask him when Resident Evil 2 is coming out, except surprise, you're in the Resident Evil 2. So while surviving zombies, lickers, tyrants, oh my, Claire comes across Sherry Birkin, and she's intent to get her out alive, which she of course manages to do so. Good job, Claire. Number 2, Pokemon Trainers, the Pokemon series. Although the main plot of all Pokemon games is about children traveling the world to earn gym membership, somehow they always end up saving the world along the way. Now, the original writer for this article I'm adapting suggested red here, which is kind of valid. It's never really clear what Team Rocket's plans are, except quite literally steal Pokemon, then a bunch of question marks, and then profit profit, but Red happens to kick their leader's butt on his way to becoming Pokemon League champion, and the protagonist of Gold and Silver does very similar. But it wasn't until Generation 3 in Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald that Pokemon started adding more story arcs, including terrorist organizations that are planning to use legendary Pokemon to rapidly change the structure of the Earth's surface. And the series tended to try and one-up itself each time in this regard, with each new crew of villains looking to warp reality, enslave humanity, or even wipe out all life on the planet. And never ever does a Pokemon game start with, hey, you're some random 10-year-old kid and you're our only hope. No, it's about the adventure, battling Pokemon, collecting gym badges, and having a fun time doing it. It just so tends to be that each trainer happens upon the evil schemes of each region's biggest threats and thwarts them on their way to greatness. So the next time you're asked which starter you're taking, pick carefully, as you're signing them up to be an accidental hero. And number 1, Edward Kenway, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Edward Kenway is a descendant of some of the greatest assassins in the history of Assassin's Creed and a direct ancestor of Heihachi and Connor from the 3rd game. And yet, despite all of these connections, the only reason why Edward ended up in the assassin's business was by pure happenstance. The renegade hero of the 4th game is not really a pirate assassin, but more of an assassin pirate. He starts off being a petty buccaneer, robbing people for nothing more than profit, but ends up wrapped in all sorts of global conspiracies and hidden wars with the Templars, and it's all because he simply robbed the wrong person at the right time. Assassin's Creed 4 begins with Edward chasing after the latest victim of his crew's ransacking across the Caribbean seas. The man he chases after is, unknowingly to him, a defector of the Assassin Order who's carrying a letter to his new Templar allies. Edward decides to deliver the letter and impersonate Duncan in hopes of getting richer off of it, but what this does to him instead is turn him into one of the most important assassins in the new world. Well, if Duncan doesn't want to be the hero, you might as well be.